My name is Christine Aubrey. Thank you for joining us as we talk about the founding history of St. Stephen's Episcopal School. It's this founding vision and history that encouraged my husband and me to send both of our daughters to St. Stephen's. It was why I served on the Board of Trustees for 6 years and why I have worked at St. Stephen's for the last 28 years. It's a remarkable story. I hope you enjoy it. I'm standing in front of the live oak where John Hines and William Brewster broke ground for St. Stephen's Episcopal School on December 26th, St. Stephen's Day. The group of people behind them are hardy Episcopalians who'd driven from downtown Austin. They'd made the hour-and-a-half pilgrimage the day after Christmas, ooh, a bug, St. Stephen's bug, to witness this marvelous occasion. We have at the foot of the tree a plaque that honors the founding Board of Trustees. So when you are on campus, when you think about the beginnings of this school, look at this beautiful live oak and think what it must have been like that day with nothing going on this hillside. As many important qualities that Brewster and Hines shared, they were quite different too. John Hines grew up in the segregated South in a small town, Seneca, South Carolina. During his youth, everyone in the town observed the horrifyingly strict Jim Crow laws and lived their lives that way. But John Hines' father, Dr. Hines, had always set an example for his children, one that Hines followed throughout his life. An example of that is Dr. Hines hired the town's first black doctor and brought him into his medical practice, and to show how much he supported this new person, he sent his entire family to become their patients. John Hines never forgot that example of leading by example. Not just, words are cheap. It's actually, you have to do something to make change. William Brewster was different in his own way. He came from a multi-generational line of Episcopal priests and artists in New England. His family had come over on the Mayflower. It's fitting that you hear the overflow of the chapel sounds when we're talking about Brewster. After the diocese gave John Hines permission to start a school, he needed to hire someone as quickly as possible. He found William Brewster, the former head of St. Mark's School in Southborough, Massachusetts. Brewster was eager to leave the Northeast, which he considered a bastion of white male privilege. He and his wonderful wife, Elizabeth, and their 5 children hopped in their station wagon and got to Texas as fast as they could. When Brewster arrived in Texas, his first job was to find land for the new school. We have so much information about that in our archives. He wrote letters to John Hines documenting his travels around Central Texas. The first letter is, Dear John, I visited Bastrop today, Camp Swift, the old Army base, but it's a temporary structure and I don't think would be a good place or give a good image for the start of our school in temporary quarters, and there are far too many mosquitoes in Bastrop. A week later, we have another letter that says, Dear John, I visited some gorgeous land up near Waco, but you know, it was just too windy. I just couldn't see our school being there. In true St. Stephen's and Austin, Texas form, Brewster was sitting at Green Shores across from St. Stephen's, across from the Palisades, with his feet up, having a cold beer, and he looked across the river, the lake, and said, that's where I want our school to be. John Hines was amenable and agreeable and marched right downtown and spoke to his friend Rob Looney, who owned Rob Roy, Rob Roy was nothing but a goat ranch at that point. But Looney was happy to sell 400 acres to Hines at $50 an acre. Looney tried to get Hines to buy 1,000 acres all the way to Bee Caves Road, and Hines said, no, I just need 400 acres. The deal, Hines paid $50 an acre, which is equal to $850 in today's dollars. But wait till you hear this. An actual acre, a real acre today in Rob Roy, costs on average $320,000. So they invested in some gorgeous land, and it was a very shrewd and smart move on their part. After they secured the land, Brewster's next job was to find an architect to build the school. He hired the architectural firm, the Austin architectural firm of Fair and Granger. Both of those men had studied with towering figures in the mid-century modern style, Eero Saarinen and Richard Neutra. That was the kind of architecture that Brewster wanted for St. Stephen's. Unpretentious, part of the land, snuggled into the land, transparent, taking advantage of the prevailing breezes. Many people have compared St. Stephen's to the look of a hill country camp in that respect, and that's exactly what Brewster and Fair and Granger had in mind. The buildings were supposed to be accessible and open to the outside. They didn't want towering red brick buildings covered with ivy. They felt that looked forbidding and foreboding. So we have the buildings today and the style of buildings that Fair and Granger started the school with. We've continued on with their idea and their philosophy. We've created as many outdoor spaces as possible. We've used the horizontally cut limestone. The classes open up to the outside. There are no internal corridors. And it is a place where people are encouraged to move around naturally, and not only to be out in nature, but to be with one another in an unstructured and friendly and happy way. You know, don't forget, Austin's millions of days, or a year, it feels like that this time of year when it's so gorgeous, of perfect weather. And the school really takes advantage of that in the most marvelous way. Most importantly, the school was founded on the bedrock of social justice. We were one of the first Episcopal boarding schools in the United States to open as a coeducational school. Hines and Brewster felt from the beginning that girls should have equal access to education as boys. In 1961, we were the first boarding school in the South to integrate. Pat Means and George Emery came to St. Stephen's from St. James Episcopal Church in Austin. Head of school at the time, Alan Becker, and Bishop Hines withstood withering crossfire for this act of social justice, including African Americans at St. Stephen's. In the famous interview that John Hines does with Hugh Downs, he said that money was withdrawn from the school to the tune of $6 million in today's market. It's interesting to note that the faculty was very supportive of including Black students at the time. John Hines went on to become the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church in the United States. His forceful voice proclaimed civil rights as human rights. He marched with Dr. King in Selma, and William Brewster's son Will marched in Washington with Dr. King. We have a long legacy of identifying with the moral leader of the century. We believe that differences among people make us smarter. Geographic differences, socioeconomic differences, religious, race, gender expression, geographic and political, all of those differences, when they come together, they enlighten us and help us lead an informed life. From the school's earliest days, we have practiced traditions and customs that you'll remember that encourage community and people being in one another's company. You can't just go to your little clique and escape into comfort. We create situations where people are engaged with people they don't know very well. For example, sit-down lunch in the dining hall with a member of the faculty or staff. Every about 3 weeks, students are assigned to a different table. That way they get to know everyone in the upper school, everyone in the middle school, and they get to know their teachers better, even if they've never had them in class. Another community building experience that's so important at St. Stephen's is, of course, daily chapel. And daily chapel is surrounded not only with the Episcopal morning prayer form, but also it welcomes people of other faiths and celebrates those holidays. It's a wonderful place for our students to learn about religious diversity. Today, as we face the tragedies of our broken nation, St. Stephen's shelters us and gives us strength to go out in the world and make a difference.